Welcome to eAssist Growing Your Dental Business podcast. Tune in as the experts in dental business share tips and tools to grow your practice. To learn more, visit dentalbilling.com. Please welcome our next guest.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Growing Your Dental Business podcast, where we explore ways to build a thriving dental practice. I'm your host, Jacqueline Hurley. I'm super excited to let you know that I'm the director of the eAssist Consultant Network, and this is where we chat with coaches who enhance the dental community with their services. And today we're going to be discussing overcoming compliance chaos and how crucial it is to be compliant in running a safe and successful dental practice. And I would like to welcome from the law office of Olivia Wann and Associates, as well as the Modern Practice Solutions, is Olivia Wann, who also owns Dogwood Springs Farm and Cabin, and she's part of the Compliance Divas. And I'm so excited to welcome you. Welcome, Olivia.
Thank you, Jacqueline. I'm so happy to be here.
Good. Olivia is from Dover, Tennessee, and she joined the dental profession in 1985, and I'm going to have her tell us a little bit about that. The thing that's so intriguing to me about Olivia is once she had joined the dental community, she was so into compliance that she ended up getting her bachelor's in healthcare administration, and she had such a high GPA that she decided to go on to jurisprudence, and she ended up in the top 30% of her with her doctorate in jurisprudence. So just congratulations to all of that, Olivia. I just am so intrigued by you and the education that you have in your life.
Thank you, Jacqueline. It was a lot of study. I'm not one of these people that are just natural brains. So I had to study all the time. And I can remember when I finished law school, how wonderful it was to listen to the radio in the car. Because for 4 years, I had listened to law lectures over and over again because I was so afraid my brain cells was not absorbing the information. So it's a lot of hard work, nothing impressive. I don't have an impressive IQ. I'm just an ordinary person that lives on a farm. That's all.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm a farm girl myself, and the one thing I brought with me from growing up on a farm is a work ethic like no other, and I'm sure that you have that work ethic. And if you want something bad enough, you're going to get it, and I feel like you did. And she was just telling me this morning she maintains a busy law practice, and she's been involved in different law ways. Basically, you were just telling me you were in court this week, right? So
This morning, I've got depositions on Friday. So I do maintain when I'm not traveling, doing lectures on consulting or working with clients on compliance, I'm working with law clients. So yes, we do stay very, very busy.
oh my goodness. Well, I connected with you earlier this year at the Hinman meeting. You were speaking at Hinman, and I was so glad I dropped into your classroom and was able to meet you in person, because I feel like we have been connected on social media for a long time, but I didn't know if we'd ever met in person. So it was such a treat, and I'm so happy we did, because that kind of brought us to today for this podcast. So tell us a little bit about how you ended up getting into the dental industry to begin with.
Well, it's I don't know how interesting it is, but when I was 17, I graduated high school when I was 17, and I worked at the courthouse as a deputy clerk and master. And I enjoyed that job, but I had an opportunity to work with a janitorial crew. And it was in the evening, so I was actually cleaning a dental office for a cleaning company. And I noticed that they had an opening, so I thought, well, I'll apply. And I didn't get the job. And I was so disappointed. And the dentist thought I was too young. And so when the person he hired didn't work out a year later, I applied again. And long story short, I quickly became the office manager. I went to technical school at night, became an RDA. And I loved office management. I stayed there 14 years. And then I decided to start training and consulting. and I thought it'd be a good idea to learn more. So I have a bachelor's degree. I was 40 when I graduated
Wow.
and went on to law school. So I was 45 when I graduated law school. So I've been practicing law 12 years and I've been consulting 24 years.
Well, that is quite a combination. And I feel like dental practices are so lucky when you consult with them. If they ask you to be their coach, they're really blessed to have you because you know the law side, you know the compliance side, you know everything that goes along with all of that. And I think they're really blessed to have you in their lives. So let's talk about OSHA first of all and being compliant. Well, I guess, what are the top OSHA violations out there right now that you've seen?
Hands down, Jacqueline, it's the lack of proper policies in place. There's certain plans we have to maintain, like the work exposure control plan. And my experience when we do these inspections and site audits, if they do have one, it's probably outdated. Or maybe they bought an office and they have an old manual with the previous practice's name.
Yeah.
And so we have to be mindful, not only have to have that work exposure control plan in place, but also has to be reviewed and revised at least annually. And then there's other related documents that are usually missing, such as the safer device evaluation that has to be done every year, the chemical inventory, the hazard communication plan, fire and emergency plans. And Jacqueline, it's interesting because the emergency plans now have to include language on active shooter.
Wow.
Those that are listening need to revisit their policies and update them with what the plan is in place because OSHA is looking for it. So to answer your question, probably a lot of documentation is missing, and especially training. Training is a critical component.
So what are the best practices when documenting compliance?
Well, one, if you're doing your own training, OSHA requires you have an OSHA compliant roster. So you're capturing the topics and it has to satisfy the rules, like, the topics you cover for bloodborne pathogens, hazard communication, and so on. And it has to list the credentials of the instructor and then the participants. It must list their designation. So it might sound petty, but I have had dental offices cited, one in particular that I could remember, 3 of the hygienists, their names were listed on the roster, but it did not have their designation of RDH.
Oh, wow.
And the OSHA officer listed it as non-compliance.
Oh, wow.
So
Well,
it can be nitpicky.
well, that's why it's good to have someone like you helping them, with all of this. So how often do they need to conduct safety inspections? Is that annually? Is that kind of what you said, or is it more often, especially when it comes to the dental equipment?
Well, training is required every year within the year. So it's better to have it sooner than it is later. And then also CDC recommends that we include infection control training. That's critical for the safety of our patients. So when we think of OSHA, it's about safety of the team, but we can't overlook the fact that we have to promote safety for our patients as well.
Right. That's great. So what are the consequences? I'm sure you've seen consequences of being non-compliant.
Well, there's, of course, the interruption to a practice, having to pay for citations, dealing with violations can be very stressful. And no one is immune, and particularly for the multi-location practices. If they don't have a good model in place, then likely all of the satellite locations are doing the same thing, which may not be correct. And so I think it's good to take a fresh approach and look at those common violations and ensure that the practice is in compliance. And it's not a bad thing, Jacqueline, to identify the flaws, identify it to figure out where we're vulnerable
Yeah.
for a violation and then fix it. Come up with a timeline. Something, for example, by next month, we're going to have the XYZ plans in place. We have a scheduled date for training, or we're going to do video-based training so that all the locations have access to the material. So set some realistic goals in place so that we are moving forward. Otherwise, we have that tendency to just bury our head in the sand and say, it's just too complicated.
That makes complete sense. So one thing I think about you as a coach is compliance is a must-have. Like it's like you coach on a must-have in a dental practice. I talk to a lot of coaches and they'll talk about communication or, just fun little things that are nice to have, but you are an absolute must-have in the dental
I tend
practice.
to scare people. I don't mean to scare them, but I'm so passionate about conforming to the regulations. And, there's consequences. There's
Yeah,
consequences if we do not.
right.
And so I think that it's wise for people to take the time to look at it and identify where they're not in compliance.
Well, I love that. I'm sure it's a common thing. My daughter has been the office manager at a pediatric dental office, and honestly, I've never had a conversation with her about this. It makes me want to ask her now.
Interestingly, Jacqueline, a lot of our clients, we have many, many that are pedo. And pedo usually have larger staff because they have a higher volume of patients. And in my personal opinion, they are more susceptible to violations just to the sheer nature of the volume.
Yeah, yeah,
So many kids going in and out.
right, right. Well, that's good to know. So let's jump over to the other side of compliance, and that's HIPAA violation. What are the top HIPAA violations that you've seen in a practice?
Well, I think of recent, I would have to say it's the right to access. And what that means is the patient has a right to access their dental record. So in my 2024 presentations, we have been discussing the violations specific to dental offices where they did not provide a copy of the record timely according to state rule. And that resulted in, well, let me back up. There's state rule and then there's federal HIPAA. And if state rule is sooner than HIPAA, then we have to follow that. So, for example, in Tennessee, it's shorter than federal HIPAA. It's 10 days, not 30.
Okay.
So if we're not providing copies of the records timely, then you could be in violation to state law and federal law. And also, I have had situations, Jacqueline, where the patient wasn't savvy to make a complaint to HIPAA, but they called the dental board. The dental board is regulatory as well. So I have handled some dental board complaints where records were not provided timely. And if you run into a problem, like I have had some offices tell me that they request a record of another dental office, and it's that other office that's not sending the record timely. So I've suggested that in their records request form, they copy and paste what the state law is. So that might motivate them to action if they see, well, state law only gives me 10 days and I need to make this a priority.
Oh,
So
yeah.
that might be a way to avoid that violation.
Yeah, that's a good way to clarify. So every state is different, it sounds like.
Yes, yes, potentially they have shorter time lengths. And another common violation that we've been seeing over the last year is that there's a lot of cell phone use where people are using their personal smartphones to take photos of patients' teeth, of patients, or even storing protected health information on their smartphones. And this results in violations because it's a personal device. The device may not be encrypted. They're not using apps that are encrypted. So we have had several violations that we've dealt with along these lines. And so we give the practices some ideas on how to deal with the need to contact patients. Like, for example, Jacqueline, my law practice management system allows texting within the program. So it's all encrypted and it's part of the law record, the client record. But that may not be the case with all these dental programs. So they're looking for ways to text and communicate with patients. Well, then just employ an app that integrates and is encrypted. Or if you have to get a work issued mobile device that is controlled by the practice.
Well, that's good to know. That is a crazy practice, knowing that they're using cell phones for that information when that is a HIPAA violation. So that's good to know.
Even with like TikTok videos is a big concern for me, where we have, cute little funny videos are being made in dental offices, and then the monitor is visible with somebody's radiographs.
Oh, in the background. Good to know.
So maybe it starts out as a harmless little funny social media video that captures lots of likes, but guess who else is watching?
Yeah.
People that work for the government, such as the Office of Civil Rights, Department of Health and Human Services, that they notice this.
Mm-hmm.
They
Yeah.
pointed out on a violation. So lots of, unfortunately, in the area of HIPAA, the fines are so costly.
That's what I was going to ask next. What are the consequences? So obviously there's fines. Is there is that pretty much explains it? Is the fines involved, or is there more than that?
Yeah, it's the fines, and it's not been uncommon for, a dentist who's experienced a breach,
Yeah.
and breach is audited, and of course they got to pay for notification and forensics and all of this, where doctors have had to tap into their retirement accounts to pay for all of this.
Oh,
And so it's so important to work with someone that's familiar with compliance and mitigate the risk. I mean, we can never insulate ourselves completely, but
yeah.
we can mitigate risk by identifying what we need to do and get those systems in place, and then hold people accountable to actually comply, that this is not optional. It has to be completed.
Yeah. Well, I think that's great information. I didn't real I you don't even think about like recording a little video in the dental practice just for fun. That's gonna, there's gonna be someone higher up paying attention and then bringing it to the law side of things and having to pay fines for that. And that's unfortunate that dentists are having to tap into their retirement and things to pay for those, because it sounds like those fines are pretty exorbitant.
Yes. So it's really critical to have cyber insurance.
Okay.
You have hundreds of thousands of dollars and maybe even $1 million fines. How will you pay for that?
Wow. So what is the best practices in documenting when it comes to HIPAA regulations?
Well, one is have your policies for HIPAA and also policies for cybersecurity, which includes the recognized security practices. So if your policies are more than 2 years old, they're probably outdated.
Mm-hmm.
Then also the issue of conducting a HIPAA risk assessment to identify vulnerabilities and threats to your database and analyze that gap and make the necessary changes. So even though it does take a little time to get that completed, which may be viewed as wasted time because it's not productive, but it's so much better than having a breach or a ransomware attack for something that could have been prevented.
Oh, absolutely. And that's something that your organization does, right? You go in and help them write up their policies and get them all compliant with all of that information.
Yes. And I think that's what sets us out as being different from some of the others, is that, when I first started, I called the dog and pony show. I would do a presentation or I'd do a training, and then I would leave. And then when I would be invited the following year, I like seeing things in the same shape. So I started writing policies and then actually doing it for the client with their names on it so that it was completed, wrapped up with a bow. So if
Nice.
we take charge of it, we know it's completed and it's done.
And that's probably what these practices want, because you're doing all the legwork for them. You're keeping them compliant by doing all that legwork. They can sign the documentation so that everything is in place, as long as they're complying with, training. I know even at eAssist, we have to do annual HIPAA, compliance training just to make sure that we're being secure when it comes to the data that we are, we come in contact with. And I'm sure it's the same at these dental practices. They need to make sure that they're staying in compliance with those type of HIPAA regulations.
Yeah, and don't be surprised. The government might ask for a copy of the rosters. They want to see how many workforce members there are and see how many people completed training. If someone violated a privacy or security rule, and I've had this experience in representing clients, they want to see that discipline was issued in writing, because the point of it is they don't want to see it happen again.
Yeah.
There was an error, there was a mistake. How do we prevent them from having that same violation again?
Right.
Move that practice forward in protecting that data.
Well, I love it. I'm back to my you're a must have, not a nice to have.
I appreciate that.
I love that. I feel like you are a nice have and your organization, I mean, not a nice have, a must to have organization, because every practice needs to stay compliant with all of this stuff. So is there anything else that you kind of can see, or hurdles that are actively challenging dental practices in 2024 while we're recording this today?
Hands down, the labor shortage.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so what we are seeing is that according to ADA studies, some practices are 11% below capacity. So that means that the employees that are in place are sometimes double tasked.
Mhm.
There are things that go to the wayside, such as compliance,
Mhm.
training, paperwork, because they simply cannot get things done.
Yeah.
And that's concerning, is how do we find people? And especially for hygienists and dental assistants, you can't just have someone that you recruit out of McDonald's, especially if the states require license.
Right.
Obviously, all the states require license for the hygienist, but some states do not for dental assistants. But what if they do? And we've had board complaints where they had dental assistants working beyond the scope of duty and I can see why they fell into that rut. They don't have enough staff. So the states are looking at how they can make this more relaxed, such as, for example, the hygienist working, in other words, they can have the easy to transfer their license from state to state. Some states have lowered the requirements on dental assistants. And so I think that this is a big issue we're dealing with right now. And just because we do have a labor shortage does not excuse us from OSHA and HIPAA compliance. We still have to do it.
Yeah.
And so if people are at a shortage level, they may well consider outsourcing it to someone that can come in and put it together and then just keep it current.
Well, that sounds amazing, because I know there's a lot of temp places that you can bring hygienists in temporarily, or however, I know there's a lot of workarounds like that, but it sounds to me like you have hit it on the head of the nail, is that the shortage is affecting the compliance and the practices as well.
I do believe so.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining me today, Olivia. What is the best way to get a hold of you? Say there's a dentist out there who's thinking, oh my gosh, I have not updated my policies for 2 years. I've got to get on top of this. What can they do with you, or how can they get a hold of you?
I think a great way is to go to oliviawann.com,
Okay.
and that is the website. Of course, it will display my law firm as well as Modern Practice Solutions. But if you go to the compliance tab, we actually have free OSHA and HIPAA posters that you can download, and the posters are on the top 10 reminders. And you can download these in color and put them up in your break room or an area where people congregate, so they could take some quick visual review of some things that they need to get taken care of.
I love it. What a nice little gift to share, so they can stay on top of it, and they can reach out to you if they want help with your organization and getting all of their, all their practices up to date and all their documentation up to date, especially. So thank you, Olivia, for joining me today. I am a firm believer that understanding all of these regulations, and these have been some incredible essential items for a dental practice. So thank you. If you are interested in learning more, go to, like Olivia said, oliviawann.com, and they can help you there at her website. Thank you, Olivia. What a great conversation today on the Growing Your Dental Business podcast. This podcast has been sponsored by eAssist Dental Solutions, where you can go to dentalbilling.com to learn how eAssist can help you with your revenue cycle management. And that might even help you with being compliant too, because then your practice won't be on the phone all the time with the dental insurance, right? They can do the things that Olivia focuses on. So thank you again, Olivia, for being here today.
My pleasure, Jacqueline.
All right. Take care, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
The purpose of this podcast is to interview the consultants within our eAssist Consultant Network. This podcast is for informational purposes only. For more details, please visit the homepage of this podcast platform at dentalbilling.com. Thanks for listening.